The stars had always watched humanity. For thousands of years, alien eyes studied the small blue planet spinning in the darkness of space. They saw humans fight each other. They saw humans burn cities and build new ones. They saw blood and fire and endless wars. The galactic community decided long ago that humans were dangerous animals, trapped on their tiny world, slowly destroying themselves. The Villani Collective was one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. Their ships were beautiful, made of crystal and light. Their cities floated in the clouds of their homeworld. They had lived in peace for 10,000 years, creating art and music while other species fought and died. They believed themselves above violence. They believed war was for primitive creatures who had not learned better ways. They were wrong. Admiral Park Do-hyun stood on the bridge of the UDS Eternal Dawn, watching the emptiness of space through the massive windows. He was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too many battles. Deep lines marked his face like scars from years of hard decisions. He had commanded the United Earth Defense Fleet for 20 years, protecting humanity's colonies from pirates and rebels. He thought his fighting days were almost over. The communication officer, a young woman named Shin Nari, suddenly sat up straight in her chair. Her fingers moved quickly across her controls. "Admiral, we are receiving a transmission. Unknown origin. It is not using any human communication codes." Do-hyun turned slowly. His heart beat faster, but his face showed nothing. "Put it on the main screen." The screen filled with light. At first, Do-hyun could not understand what he was seeing. The being before him seemed made of glass and starlight, constantly shifting and changing. It was beautiful and strange, and completely alien. "I am Ambassador Veleth of the Villani Collective," the being said. Its voice sounded like wind blowing through wind chimes. "We come seeking the species called humanity." Do-hyun took a step forward. Behind him, his crew had stopped breathing. This was first contact, the moment humanity had dreamed about for centuries. "I am Admiral Park Do-hyun of the United Earth Defense Fleet. You have found us." The ambassador's form flickered. Something in its movements looked wrong to Do-hyun. After decades of command, he had learned to read body language. This creature, whatever it was, seemed afraid. "We have watched your species for many cycles," Veleth said. "We saw your wars, your weapons, the destruction you brought upon yourselves. We judged you as primitive, violent, beneath our attention." The ambassador paused. "We were wrong." Captain Yoon Minji moved to stand beside Do-hyun. She was 50 years old with silver streaks in her black hair and a mind sharper than any blade. She had served under Do-hyun for 15 years, and he trusted her more than anyone alive. Her eyes were fixed on the alien with intense focus. "Why are you here?" Do-hyun asked simply. "Because we are dying," Veleth answered. "The Krath Dominion has conquered 11 of our worlds. They burn our cities, they kill our people. Our fleets were beautiful, but they were not built for war. They broke like glass against the Krath weapons." The ambassador's light dimmed, and Do-hyun realized it was showing grief. "We have no one else to ask. The other species fear the Krath. They hide and hope they will not be noticed. But humanity..." The light flickered again. "Humanity knows how to fight. Humanity has always known." Minji leaned close to Do-hyun. "Sir, this could be a trap." "It could be," he agreed quietly. "But look at it. That creature is terrified. Whatever is hunting them is worse than anything they imagine." Do-hyun faced the screen again. "Tell me about the Krath Dominion. Tell me everything." For the next hour, Ambassador Veleth shared information that changed everything. The Krath were conquerors. Their empire stretched across half the galaxy, built on the corpses of civilizations that had existed for millions of years. They were massive creatures, covered in natural armor, with strength that could tear metal apart. Their ships were huge and terrible, designed only to destroy. They felt no mercy. They knew no fear. They simply consumed everything in their path. "How many ships do they have?" Minji asked. "Thousands," Veleth replied. "Perhaps tens of thousands. We do not know for certain. No one has ever counted and survived." Shin Nari made a small sound of fear at her station. Other crew members exchanged worried looks. But Do-hyun remained still, his eyes distant, thinking. "Why us?" he finally asked. You said other species are hiding. Why do you believe humanity can do what no one else has done? The ambassador's form grew brighter. Because you are the only species that frightens us as much as the Krath. Your history is written in blood. Your greatest heroes are warriors. You have spent 10,000 years learning to kill each other in more and more terrible ways. The Krath have never faced an enemy like that. They have conquered peaceful worlds, civilized worlds. They have never faced a species that loves war as much as they do. Doyun should have been insulted. His people were being called monsters, animals, killers. But as he looked at the desperate alien begging for help, he understood something important. All those wars, all that suffering, all the lessons written in the blood of billions of human soldiers throughout history, they had prepared humanity for this moment. I cannot make this decision alone, Doyun said. I must speak with Earth's government. Please, Vela said, and the desperation in its voice was painful to hear. My homeworld has 7 days before the Krath fleet arrives. 7 days before everything my people have built is destroyed. Please. Doyun turned to Minji. She looked back at him, and he saw in her eyes the same thing he felt in his chest. They were soldiers. They had sworn to protect the innocent. It did not matter that these innocents were alien. It did not matter that the enemy was impossibly strong. This was what they had trained for their entire lives. Send an emergency transmission to Earth, Doyun ordered. Priority Alpha. Tell them first contact has been made. He paused, looking back at the shimmering ambassador. Tell them someone needs our help. And tell them to wake up the fleet. Minji allowed herself a small smile. All of it, sir? All of it. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon we have ever built or dreamed of building. Doyun's eyes were hard now, filled with something that had been sleeping for years. If we are going to war, we are going to war as humanity, together. The transmission ended. Ambassador Velith faded from the screen. But the message had been sent, and across the stars humanity began to stir. The sleeping giant was waking up, and the galaxy would never be the same. Part 2. The Council of War. The news spread across Earth like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every screen on the planet showed the same images. Alien ships, burning cities, creatures made of light begging for help. People stopped in the streets to watch. Factories fell silent. Schools closed early. For the first time in human history, the entire species held its breath together. In the Great Hall of the United Earth Council, the most powerful leaders on the planet gathered around a massive circular table. Presidents and prime ministers, generals and admirals, scientists and diplomats. They came from every nation, every culture, every corner of the world. Their faces were serious, their eyes fixed on the holographic display floating above the table. Fleet Commander Bayek Jisu stood at the center of the room. She was 42 years old, the youngest person to ever hold her rank. Her uniform was simple and clean, without unnecessary decorations. Her black hair was pulled back, tight, and her face showed no emotion as she waited for the room to settle. Thank you all for coming so quickly, she began, her voice clear and strong. I know you have questions. I will try to answer them. She pressed a button, and the holographic display changed. It showed a map of the galaxy with thousands of tiny lights representing stars and planets. A large section was colored red. This is the Krath Dominion, Jisu explained. They control approximately 40% of the known galaxy. Their empire includes over 200 conquered species. Some of these species no longer exist. The Krath destroyed them completely. Murmurs rippled through the room. Counselor Han Tai-Wu, an elderly man who had served in government for 50 years, raised his hand. Commander, what do we know about their military strength? Jisu changed the display again. This time it showed a massive ship covered in weapons and armor, surrounded by smaller vessels like wolves around their leader. The Velani have given us everything they know. The Krath fleet is estimated at 10,000 warships. Their largest vessels are called World Breakers. They are 3 kilometers long and carry enough firepower to destroy a planet. Silence fell over the room. People looked at each other with fear in their eyes. Earth's entire fleet was less than 500 ships. Their largest vessel was barely half a kilometer long. You are asking us to fight that? Said President Kim Soo-young of the Korean Federation, a woman known for her sharp mind and sharper tongue. That is not a war, Commander. That is suicide. Perhaps, Jisu admitted, but I am not finished. She changed the display once more. Now it showed detailed information about craft tactics, formations, and strategies. The Villani gathered this intelligence over many years of running from the Krath. They documented everything because they hoped someone, someday, would use it. Jisu looked around the room. The Krath have never lost a battle. Do you know why? No one answered. Because no one has ever truly fought them. Jisu stepped closer to the display, pointing at the formations. Look at this. Their tactics are simple. They find an enemy. They surround them with superior numbers. They destroy them with overwhelming firepower. It has worked every time because every species they face tried to fight the same way. Meet force with force, match numbers with numbers. She shook her head. They lost because they played the Krath game. General Moon Jae-ho of the United Earth Army leaned forward. He was a large man with a scarred face, a veteran of 3 colonial conflicts. What are you suggesting, Commander? I am suggesting that we do not play their game. Jisu smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. Humanity has spent 10,000 years fighting itself. Every war taught us something new. Every battle added to our knowledge. We have learned tricks that no alien species has ever seen because we developed them against the most creative and dangerous enemy possible. Each other. She brought up new images. Ancient battles, medieval warfare, world wars, guerrilla tactics, space combat simulations, flanking maneuvers, ambush strategies, psychological warfare, deception and misdirection, combined arms operations, electronic warfare, special forces operations. The images flashed faster and faster. The Krath have conquered peaceful civilizations. Scientists and artists and philosophers who never dreamed of war. They have never faced a species that treats combat as an art form. Counselor Han Tae-woo stood slowly, his old bones creaking. You believe we can win? I believe we can fight, Jisu replied. I believe we can hurt them. I believe we can show the galaxy that the Krath are not invincible. And yes, Counselor, I believe we can win. But only if we commit everything. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon, every dirty trick humanity has ever invented. The room erupted in argument. Some demanded immediate action, others called for caution. A few suggested negotiating with the Krath or hiding from them. Voices grew louder and louder until President Kim stood up and slammed her hand on the table. Enough, she shouted. The room fell silent. She turned to Jisu. Commander, you are asking us to risk everything on a battle we may not win against an enemy we do not understand, to save a species we have never met. Why should we? Jisu was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. Because someday it will be us. The Krath do not stop. They do not negotiate. They do not spare anyone. If we hide today, they will find us tomorrow, or next year, or in 100 years. But they will find us. She looked around the room at every face. We can fight them now, when we have allies and intelligence and time to prepare, or we can fight them later, alone, with nothing but desperation. I know which battle I would rather fight. The silence stretched on. Then General Moon stood up. I vote yes. Send the fleet. One by one, others stood. Admiral Choi Yoongi of the Navy, General Seo Hana of the Air Force, President Kim, Counselor Han. More and more until the entire room was standing. Jisu felt tears building in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. Then we are agreed. Humanity goes to war. Within hours, the orders went out. Shipyards that had been quiet for decades powered up their machines. Retired soldiers received calls asking them to serve one more time. Scientists opened sealed files containing weapons too terrible to use against other humans. Factories switched from producing consumer goods to producing ammunition and armor. And in homes across the planet, families said goodbye to their loved ones. Fathers hugged their children. Mothers kissed their sons and daughters. Husbands and wives held each other in the darkness, knowing they might never hold each other again. Humanity was going to war, not for land or money or power, not for revenge or conquest or glory. They were going to war because someone had asked for help. Because somewhere in the stars, innocent people were dying. Because that was what humans did. They fought, they bled, they sacrificed, and sometimes against all odds they won. The shipyards above Mars had been silent for 15 years. They were built during the colonial wars, when humanity fought against itself among the stars. When peace came, the massive construction docks were shut down. The machines were turned off. The workers went home. Everyone hoped they would never be needed again. Now the shipyards burned with light and noise. Thousands of workers moved through the metal corridors like blood through veins. Sparks flew from welding torches. Massive cranes lifted armor plating that weighed more than buildings. The sound of hammers and machines and shouting voices filled the void of space. Chief Engineer Cho Yunji stood on an observation platform, watching it all happen. She was 55 years old with gray streaks in her tied-back hair and burn scars on her hands from decades of working with hot metal. She had designed ships during the colonial wars, ships that destroyed other ships, ships that killed people. When the wars ended, she swore she would never build weapons again. She broke that promise 3 days ago. "The frame is almost complete," said her assistant, Kim Hyunwoo. He was a young man, barely 25, fresh from the engineering academy. His eyes were wide as he watched the skeleton of the massive vessel taking shape before them. "I still cannot believe the size of it." Yunji nodded slowly. "The Hammer of Terra, 2 kilometers long, 50 meters of armor plating, weapon systems that could crack a moon in half." She sighed heavily. "We designed it 20 years ago, during the worst of the fighting. We were afraid that someone would build something like this. So we built it first. Then we locked the plans away and prayed no one would ever need them." Hyunwoo swallowed nervously. "And now someone does. Now everyone does." Across the solar system, similar scenes played out. In Earth's orbit, carriers took shape like massive metal birds. Around Jupiter's moons, destroyer factories produced ships by the dozen. Near Saturn's rings, weapons platforms bristled with missiles and railguns. Humanity was building an armada. Admiral Park Do-hyun visited the shipyards personally. He walked through the construction docks with Captain Yoon Minji at his side, watching the workers and inspecting the ships. Everywhere he went, people stopped to salute. Some had tears in their eyes. They knew what was coming. They knew why these ships were being built. "How long until the fleet is ready?" Do-hyun asked Yunji as they stood before the Hammer of Terra. "2 more months for the main combat vessels," she replied. "But we are rushing, cutting corners. Some of these ships will not be perfect. They do not need to be perfect. They need to be strong enough to fight." Yunji looked at the old admiral with tired eyes. "Is it true what they say, that the enemy has 10,000 ships?" "It is true, and we are building 500. Do-hyun smiled slightly. "Then we will have to make each ship worth 20 of theirs." The admiral moved on, but his words stayed with Yunji. That night, she called a meeting with her senior engineers. She showed them the designs they had created, the weapons they had imagined, the terrible machines they had dreamed up during the darkest days of human war. "We held these back because we thought they were too dangerous," she told them, "too powerful, too destructive. We were afraid of what humanity would do with them." She looked at each face around the table. "Now there is something more dangerous than us. Now we need everything we were afraid to build." The engineers went to work. They pulled old files from sealed archives. They reopened research projects that had been abandoned years ago. They created weapons that had existed only in nightmares. Railguns that fired projectiles at a fraction of the speed of light. Missiles carrying antimatter warheads. Energy shields based on technology reverse-engineered from the Vellani. Electronic warfare systems that could blind an enemy fleet. Boarding torpedoes filled with heavily armed Marines. Fighter craft faster and more dangerous than anything in the galaxy. The Vellani ambassador visited the shipyards once. Velith floated through the construction areas, its crystalline form flickering with what might have been shock or fear or amazement. "You built all of this in weeks," Velith said to Captain Minji, who served as its guide. "My people took centuries to develop our fleet technology. You have done in days what we could not do in generations." Minji watched a team of workers installing a massive railgun battery. "We are very good at building things that kill." "Yes, I am beginning to understand this." The ambassador's light dimmed. When my people first observed humanity, we saw your wars and felt pity. We thought you were trapped in a cycle of violence you could not escape. We did not understand. Understand what? That the violence was training, that every war was a lesson, that you were preparing for something. Velith turned to face Minji. Were you? Preparing? Minji thought about the question carefully. Not consciously. We fought each other because we could not help it, because we were scared and angry and greedy and proud. But each time we fought, we learned. We got better at it, smarter, more efficient. She gestured at the shipyard around them. All of this knowledge came from pain, from loss, from millions of people dying so that we could learn how to fight better. And now you will use that knowledge to save my people. Yes, even though we looked down on you, even though we called you primitive. Minji smiled grimly. We are primitive, but sometimes primitive is exactly what you need. 6 months passed. The fleet came together, piece by piece. 500 warships, 60 carriers, 30 dreadnoughts, thousands of fighters and bombers and support craft, the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. And at the center of it all stood the flagship, the UDS Unconquered Sun, 3 kilometers of armor and weapons and fury. Admiral Park Do-hyun walked its corridors for the first time on the day it was completed. He touched the walls and felt the engines humming beneath his feet. He stood on the bridge and looked out at the stars. Are you ready, old friend? Captain Minji asked, standing beside him. Do-hyun was quiet for a long moment. I have been ready my entire life. I just did not know what I was ready for. He turned to face her. Send the signal. Tell the fleet to prepare for departure. Where are we going? To introduce ourselves to the galaxy. Do-hyun's eyes were hard and bright. And to show them what happens when you threaten humanity's friends. The signal went out. Across the solar system, engines roared to life. Hundreds of ships turned toward the stars. The legendary fleet was rising. And somewhere in the darkness of space, the craft Dominion was about to meet an enemy unlike any they had ever faced. The planet Sereth Prime had been beautiful once. Its cities floated among the clouds on platforms of crystal and light. Its libraries held the knowledge of 1,000 generations. Its people had never known war, only peace and art, and the slow pursuit of wisdom. Now it burned. Krath warships hung in orbit like dark metal mountains. Their weapons fired endlessly, pouring destruction onto the world below. Floating cities fell from the sky, trailing fire and screams. Libraries that had stood for 10,000 years turned to ash in seconds. The Villani who could not escape died where they stood, their beautiful crystal forms shattering under the endless assault. Supreme Commander Vreth watched it all from the bridge of his flagship, the Infinite Conquest. He was massive, even by Krath standards. 3 meters tall, covered in natural armor the color of dried blood, with 4 arms ending in claws that could tear through metal. His eyes were small and cruel, glittering with pleasure as he watched the planet die. How much longer until total pacification? He asked his subordinate. 3 days, Supreme Commander. The Villani are offering no resistance. Their remaining population is concentrated in the southern hemisphere. Vreth made a sound of disgust. Pathetic creatures. They do not even know how to die fighting. Increase bombardment. I want this world silent by tomorrow. His subordinate hesitated. Supreme Commander, we have detected unusual energy signatures at the edge of the system. Something is approaching through fold space. Vreth turned slowly. In 200 years of conquest, he had never heard the tone of voice from one of his officers. What do you mean, something is approaching? The Villani have no allies? No one dares oppose us. It is not Villani, Supreme Commander. The ship signatures do not match any species in our records. Before Vreth could respond, space itself seemed to tear open. Bright lines of light appeared across the darkness, expanding into doorways between stars. And through those doorways came ships, dozens of them, then hundreds. Angular, aggressive vessels covered in weapons, their hulls painted with symbols Vreth had never seen. Unknown contacts emerging from fold space, the sensor officer reported, his voice rising with each word. 500-plus vessels. Configuration unknown. Weapons charged. Vreth's eyes narrowed. The Villani hired mercenaries? Fools, destroy them. The Krath fleet turned away from Sirath Prime. 200 warships moved into attack formation, their weapons powering up. They had destroyed 1,000 fleets this way. Superior numbers, overwhelming firepower, the simple mathematics of conquest. Then a transmission cut through every frequency. Every screen on every Krath ship displayed the same image. A human face, old, weathered, hard as stone, eyes that held no fear, only cold calculation. This is Admiral Park Do-hyun of the United Earth Defense Fleet. His voice was calm, almost soft, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. You have attacked our allies. You have murdered civilians. You have burned worlds that did nothing to deserve your hatred. He paused, and his expression did not change at all. We are humanity, and we have come to stop you. Supreme Commander Vreth laughed. It was an ugly sound, like rocks grinding together. Humanity? I have never heard of your species. You are nothing, less than nothing. You will die screaming like all the others. No, Admiral Do-hyun replied simply. We will not. The first shot came from the UDS Unconquered Sun, a railgun projectile traveling at half the speed of light. It crossed the distance between fleets in less than a second. The first Krath cruiser it hit simply ceased to exist, converted from solid matter into expanding plasma. Open fire, Do-hyun ordered. The human fleet unleashed everything at once. Railgun batteries roared, missile swarms launched by the thousand. Energy weapons designed to overload shields painted the darkness with light. Fighter craft poured from carrier bays like angry insects, their pilots hungry for battle. The Krath fleet staggered. 3 ships died in the first volley, then 7 more. They tried to return fire, but the human ships were already moving, scattering into patterns that made targeting impossible. What is this? Vreth roared, watching his tactical display turn red with alerts. They are not fighting properly. Form up. Return to formation. But the humans were not interested in formations. Captain Yoon Minji commanded the center group from the Eternal Dawn, directing her ships like a conductor directing an orchestra. Destroyer Wing 3, flank left. Carrier group, hold position, and launch second wave. Frigate squadron, I want those Krath cruisers separated from their main line. Lieutenant Lee Soo-jin worked her console with desperate speed, tracking dozens of enemy ships at once. Their formation is breaking. They are trying to consolidate, but our fighters are preventing it. Good. Keep the pressure on. Do not let them recover. On the unconquered sun, Admiral Do-hyun watched the battle unfold with quiet satisfaction. The Krath were strong. Their ships were tough, their weapons powerful, but they fought like they had always fought. Straight lines, massed fire, simple, predictable tactics that had worked against peaceful species who did not know any better. Humanity knew better. Commander Kwan, Do-hyun said to his fighter coordinator, execute maneuver Dancing Thunder. I want their command ship isolated. Commander Kwon Junho grinned and relayed the orders. Human fighters swarmed toward the infinite conquest in a complex pattern that seemed random but was actually precisely calculated. They drew fire from the escort ships, pulling them out of position, creating gaps in the defensive screen. Lieutenant Park Yerin led the strike team that slipped through those gaps. She was 23 years old, barely out of flight school, but she flew like she had been born in a cockpit. Her fighter wove through defensive fire that would have killed a lesser pilot, her eyes fixed on the target. Shield generators identified, she reported, beginning attack run. Her missiles struck true. The infinite conquest shields flickered and died. The massive flagship was suddenly vulnerable, naked before the human fleet. Supreme Commander Vreth stared at his screens in disbelief. His ships were dying around him. His perfect formation had collapsed into chaos. His fleet, which had conquered hundreds of worlds without a single defeat, was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that should not have existed. Retreat, he ordered, the word tasting like poison in his mouth. All ships, retreat to the Dominion core. We must regroup. The Krath fleet fled. They jumped to fold space in desperate waves, abandoning their damaged ships, abandoning their wounded, abandoning everything in their panic to escape. Within an hour, only debris remained where 200 warships had been. Admiral Do-hyun surveyed the battlefield. 37 human ships had been destroyed or damaged, a painful loss. But the Krath had lost over 100, and more importantly, they had lost something they had never lost before. They had lost their certainty of victory. "Admiral," Captain Minji reported, her voice tired but triumphant, "Sarath Prime is reporting that the bombardment has stopped. The Villani survivors are sending thanks. They say they never believed anyone would come." Do-yun nodded slowly. "Tell them we have only begun. The Krath will return with more ships, more weapons, more soldiers. This war is not over." He looked out at the stars, at the distant light of Sarath Prime, at the wreckage of the first battle between humanity and the galaxy's greatest conquerors. It has only just started. News of the Battle of Sarath Prime spread across the galaxy like wildfire. For the first time in 200 years, the Krath Dominion had retreated. For the first time ever, they had lost ships to an enemy they could not simply crush with numbers. Species that had been hiding for generations emerged from their hiding places to ask the same question. Who were these humans? Where did they come from? And how did they do what no one else could do? The answer lay not in superior technology or greater numbers, but in something far more valuable: 10,000 years of bloody education. Supreme Commander Vreth gathered the largest fleet in Krath history. 6,000 warships assembled at a staging point near the Villani border. Troop transports carried millions of soldiers. Supply ships brought enough ammunition to burn 100 worlds. This time, there would be no mercy. This time, humanity would be erased from existence. Admiral Park Do-yun received intelligence reports about the gathering fleet and smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter watching prey walk into a trap. "They are doing exactly what we expected," he told his command staff aboard the Unconquered Sun. "They lost one battle, so they are responding with more force. It is the only tactic they know." Captain Minji studied the intelligence data. 6,000 ships. We have 500 remaining after repairs. The math does not favor us. Math never favors the smaller force. History sometimes does. Do-yun pulled up a holographic display showing the expected Krath approach route. "They will come in a single massive wave, expecting to overwhelm us. They do not understand that we have been fighting wars like this for thousands of years." Major Song Herin, the intelligence officer, nodded in understanding. The Battle of Thermopylae, a small force holding a narrow pass against a massive army. And Agincourt, and Midway, and 100 others. Do-yun highlighted several points on the map. Humanity learned long ago that numbers are not everything. Position matters, surprise matters. Making the enemy fight on your terms instead of theirs matters most of all. The plan was complex, and small squadrons would harass the Krath flanks, drawing ships away from the main fleet. Electronic warfare units would disrupt communications and targeting systems. Minefields would be placed along the expected approach routes, and at the center of it all, the main human fleet would wait at a location carefully chosen to give them every possible advantage. The Krath fleet arrived 3 days later. Vreth led from the front this time, determined to destroy these upstart humans personally. His flagship pushed forward, surrounded by hundreds of escorts, weapons charged and ready. He expected to find the human fleet waiting in a defensive formation, easy targets for his superior numbers. Instead, he found empty space. "Where are they?" Vreth demanded. "Our scouts reported they were here." "Searching, Supreme Commander. We are detecting no major fleet signatures in the area." Then the first mine detonated. It was hidden in the debris of an old asteroid, completely invisible to Krath sensors until a cruiser flew too close. The explosion destroyed the cruiser and 2 ships beside it. Before the Krath could respond, more mines detonated across the fleet. Dozens of ships died in seconds, killed by weapons they never saw. "Find those mines," Vreth screamed. "Deploy sensor sweeps." The Krath fleet slowed, suddenly cautious. Their sensors spread out, searching for the hidden weapons. While they searched, human destroyers emerged from behind a nearby moon and launched torpedo salvos before vanishing again. More Krath ships died. The massive fleet, which should have been unstoppable, was being picked apart piece by piece. Commander Youngmin Seo led the harassment squadrons from her carrier, the Liberation. Her pilots struck and retreated, never staying in one place long enough for the Krath to respond effectively. "Hit their fuel ships," she ordered. Without fuel, their fleet becomes a floating graveyard. Lieutenant Park Yaren dove through defensive fire to deliver her payload. Her missile struck a massive tanker, and the resulting explosion took out 4 escorts. Target destroyed, moving to secondary. On the Eternal Dawn, Captain Minji coordinated the chaos like a chess master, moving pieces across a board. Squadron 7, pull back. They are trying to trap you. Squadron 12, advance to grid coordinate 97. Enemy destroyer group is vulnerable. Lieutenant Shin Nari monitored enemy communications from her station. Their command structure is breaking down. They are used to simple orders from above. Our attacks are coming from so many directions, their commanders cannot keep up. Minji nodded grimly. That is the point. The Krath have never faced decentralized warfare. They do not know how to handle an enemy that thinks for itself at every level. Hours passed. The Krath fleet pushed forward, absorbing losses, desperately searching for the main human force. They found it waiting at the edge of a dense asteroid field, where the rocks provided natural cover and limited the Krath ability to bring all their weapons to bear at once. Supreme Commander Vreth saw the trap and charged into it anyway. His pride would not let him retreat again. His rage demanded human blood. His entire worldview required these inferior creatures to die. Admiral Do-hyun watched the Krath approach and gave the order. All ships execute Operation Hammer and Anvil. The human fleet split into 2 forces. One held position in the asteroid field, drawing Krath attention. The other looped around, using the asteroids as cover, positioning itself behind the enemy. When the Krath committed to their assault on the first force, the second struck from behind. The Krath fleet was suddenly fighting on 2 fronts. Their formations, designed for forward assault, could not adapt quickly enough. Ships trying to turn and engage the rear attack exposed themselves to the front force. Ships that stayed in formation were shot in the back. Vreth watched his tactical display fill with red icons marking destroyed ships. "This is impossible," he growled. "We outnumber them 10 to 1. How are they doing this?" His subordinate, voice trembling, tried to explain. "Their tactics are unlike anything in our records, Supreme Commander. They are using strategies we have never seen. Every time we counter one attack, another comes from a different direction. It is as if they have been preparing for exactly this kind of battle for their entire history." That is exactly what they have been doing, Vreth realized too late. Their entire species has been training for war since they first picked up rocks and sticks. Every battle they fought against each other taught them something new. Every war refined their methods. We conquered peaceful civilizations. They conquered themselves. The Battle of the Asteroid Belt lasted 12 hours. When it ended, the Krath had lost over 2,000 ships. Human losses were heavy too, nearly 150 vessels destroyed or disabled. But the result was undeniable. The largest fleet the Dominion had ever assembled had been broken by an enemy 1/10 its size. Admiral Do-hyun stood on the bridge of the unconquered sun, exhausted but unbowed. Around him, his crew worked to assess damage and coordinate repairs. The cost had been high. Good people had died, good ships had been lost, but the Krath had learned a lesson they would never forget. Humanity was not just dangerous. Humanity was an artist of war, and the galaxy's greatest conquerors had finally met their match. The Krath homeworld was called Krath Prime. It was a harsh planet covered in jagged mountains and dark seas. The Krath had evolved there, fighting each other for resources until they became the strongest species on their world. Then they built ships and took their violence to the stars. Now that violence was coming home. Supreme Commander Vreth had returned to Krath Prime in disgrace. His defeat at the asteroid belt was the worst military failure in Dominion history. The Krath High Council stripped him of his rank and gave him one final chance to redeem himself. He was ordered to defend the homeworld with whatever forces remained. Those forces were still impressive. 4,000 warships gathered around Krath Prime, forming defensive rings around the planet. Orbital stations bristling with weapons surrounded the world. Ground forces numbered in the billions. If humanity wanted to end the war, they would have to break through all of it. Admiral Park Do-hyun studied the intelligence reports in his quarters aboard the unconquered sun. His fleet had grown since the war began. Species that had hidden from the Krath for generations now sent ships to join the human cause. Villani vessels, rebuilt with human weapon systems. scouts from a species called the Turani, even some Krath deserters who had grown tired of endless conquest. The combined fleet numbered nearly 1,000 ships, still not enough to match the Krath defenders directly. "We cannot win a straight fight," Captain Minji said during the planning meeting. "Even with our allies, we are still outnumbered 4-1, and the defensive positions around Krath Prime are extremely strong." "Then we do not fight straight," Do-Yun replied. He pulled up a detailed map of the Krath system. "We have learned much about the Dominion during this war. Their society is built on strength and fear. The High Council rules because no one dares challenge them. Vreth commands because defeat should have meant death, but they need him too badly to execute him." Major Song Heron understood immediately. The Krath are not unified. They are held together by the belief that the Dominion cannot be defeated. If we break that belief, then we break the Dominion itself. Do-Yun nodded. The assault on Krath Prime is not just military, it is psychological. We need to show the entire Krath species that their leaders cannot protect them, that the war they started will end on their own doorstep. The plan was audacious. The main fleet would engage the Krath defenders and draw their attention. Meanwhile, a smaller force of fast ships would slip through the defensive lines and strike directly at the orbital stations. And while all of this happened, Marines would land on the planet itself. Colonel Bei Sung-ho commanded the Marine Force. He was a giant of a man, scarred from 3 colonial wars, with a voice like grinding stone. His troops were the best humanity had to offer. They had trained their entire lives for moments like this. "We are not here to conquer," Sung-ho told his soldiers before the assault. "We are here to show them that no one is safe when they choose to make enemies of humanity. We fight hard, we fight smart, and when it is over, we show them we are not monsters. We are soldiers. And soldiers know the difference between an enemy combatant and a civilian." The Battle of Krath Prime began at dawn by Earth Standard Time. Human ships emerged from fold space at multiple points around the system. The Krath defenders scrambled to respond, but the humans were everywhere at once. Commander Young Min Seo led the carrier assault on the northern defensive ring. Her fighters swept through Krath formations like fire through dry grass, destroying weapons platforms and clearing paths for larger ships to follow. Lieutenant Park Yeren flew mission after mission until her fighter was damaged beyond repair. She ejected safely and was recovered by a support ship, cursing in frustration at being taken out of the fight. Captain Minji commanded the main fleet engagement from the Eternal Dawn. Her voice stayed calm even as enemy fire rocked her ship. "Maintain formation. Target their command vessels first. Without coordination, their numbers mean nothing." Admiral Do-Yun directed the overall battle from the unconquered sun, moving pieces across the tactical board with cold precision. He had done this so many times before, against pirates, against rebels, against other humans in wars he wished had never happened. But this time felt different. This time, the stakes were higher than any battle he had ever fought. The Marine transports slipped through the chaos while the fleets exchanged fire above. Colonel Sung-ho's dropship screamed through Krath Prime's atmosphere, landing zones marked by fire from orbital support. The first troops hit the ground running, securing a landing zone near a major military installation. Krath ground forces responded quickly. Massive warriors in heavy armor charged the human positions. The first clash was brutal. Krath soldiers were stronger, tougher, more naturally suited for combat, but the humans fought with a desperate creativity that seemed almost mad to their enemies. Sergeant Ojaewon led a squad that was almost overrun by Krath warriors. Instead of retreating, he ordered his troops to use their environment. They collapsed a building onto the advancing enemy, then picked off survivors from the rubble. When ammunition ran low, they recovered Krath weapons and used those instead. Chief Medical Officer Im Yuna set up field hospitals wherever she could find space. She treated human wounded and Krath prisoners with equal care. One Krath officer, bleeding from wounds that should have killed him, stared at her in confusion as she worked to save his life. "Why?" he asked, his voice weak. "We would have killed you all." Yuna did not look up from her work. "Because we are not you, and that is why we are going to win." In orbit, the battle reached its climax. The Krath defensive rings were collapsing. Human ships pushed through the gaps, targeting the orbital stations that controlled the planet's defenses. The Infinite Conquest, Vreth's flagship, made a final desperate charge against the unconquered sun. Doyun watched the massive vessel approach. It was 3 times the size of his ship, armed with weapons that could have destroyed cities. But he did not flinch. He had faced death before. He would face it again. All batteries, concentrate fire on the enemy flagship. Everything we have. The unconquered sun unleashed a storm of destruction. Railguns roared, missiles launched by the hundred. Energy weapons carved lines of light through the darkness. The Infinite Conquest shields held for seconds, then failed. Its armor lasted longer, but not long enough. Supreme Commander Vreth sent one final transmission as his ship died around him. "What are you?" he demanded, his voice filled with rage and something that might have been fear. "What species fights like this?" Admiral Doyun answered him calmly. "We are human. We learn from the best. Each other." The Infinite Conquest exploded. Supreme Commander Vreth died with it, and across the battlefield, Krath's ships began to surrender. On the surface, Colonel Sungho accepted the surrender of the main military base. Krath's soldiers laid down their weapons, unable to understand how they had lost to creatures half their size. But the humans did not celebrate. There was no joy in this victory, only the grim satisfaction of a job completed. The war was over. The Krath Dominion had fallen, and humanity, the primitive species that the galaxy had dismissed and ignored, had become the most feared and respected force among the stars. 1 year had passed since the fall of the Krath Dominion. The galaxy was still learning how to breathe again. The war had ended, but the work had only begun. Worlds that had burned under Krath occupation needed to be rebuilt. Species that had been enslaved for generations needed help finding their way back to freedom. And the Krath themselves, suddenly stripped of their empire, needed to learn how to exist without conquest. Humanity did not step back from these challenges. They had come to fight a war, but they stayed to build a peace. Admiral Park Doyun retired from active command 3 months after the final battle. His body was tired, his heart heavy with the weight of all the deaths he had ordered. But before he left, he made one final speech to the combined fleet that had gathered to honor him. "We did not ask for this war," he said, his voice carrying across the vacuum of space through countless communication systems. "We did not want it, but when it came, we faced it the only way we knew how. With everything we had, with every lesson our ancestors learned through blood and sacrifice." He paused, looking out at the ships of a dozen species hanging in formation around him. "Now we have a different task. We must take all that knowledge of war and use it to build something better. That is harder than fighting. But I believe we can do it." He stepped down from command and Captain Yoon Minji took his place. She was promoted to admiral, the first of a new generation of leaders who had been forged in the fire of the Krath War. Her first order was to begin converting warships into construction vessels. The fleet that had saved the galaxy would now help rebuild it. The Galactic Assembly gathered for the first time in centuries. Representatives from over 100 species came together in a massive station built in neutral space. They had different forms, different cultures, different histories, but they shared one thing. They had all been touched by the war that humanity had won. Ambassador An Jihye represented Earth at the assembly. She was small for a human, soft-spoken, with gentle eyes that seemed to see the best in everyone. She had spent her life studying other cultures, dreaming of the day when humanity would join a larger community. Now that day had come, and she was terrified. Not of the aliens. She was terrified of what they thought of humanity. "They look at us like we are monsters," she confided to her assistant, a young man named Ko Ji-hoon, before her first address. "I can see it in how they move away when we pass, how they fall silent when we enter a room." Ji-hoon nodded slowly. "We won the war by being better at violence than the most violent species in the galaxy. Can you blame them for being afraid?" "No, but I can show them that we are more than that." When Jahie took the podium, she faced 1,000 alien eyes filled with fear and suspicion. She thought about all the speeches she had prepared, all the careful diplomatic language designed to reassure. Then she threw it all away. "You are afraid of us," she said simply. "I understand. When your species first learned about humanity, you saw our wars, our weapons, the terrible things we did to each other. You decided we were primitive, dangerous. Better left alone on our little blue world. The assembly stirred uneasily. This was not what they expected. You were right to be cautious, Jihye continued. We are dangerous. We have spent 10,000 years learning how to destroy things, how to kill, how to survive no matter the cost. That knowledge saved you from the Krath, but it also terrifies you, and that terror is justified. She paused, letting her words sink in. But we are also more than our violence. Every war we fought taught us something beyond tactics and weapons. It taught us the cost of conflict, the pain of losing people we love, the emptiness of victory bought with blood. Jihi's voice softened. We became warriors because we had to, but we have always dreamed of something better. She pressed a button, and images appeared behind her. Human doctors treating Villani wounded, engineers helping rebuild destroyed cities, teachers sharing knowledge with alien children, soldiers planting gardens in the ruins of Krath military bases. This is also who we are, healers and builders and dreamers. We did not travel across the stars to conquer. We came because someone asked for help, because that is what we do. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves, and when the fighting is done, we help pick up the pieces. The assembly was silent. Jihi could not tell if they were moved or simply stunned. Humanity asks only this, she said finally. Let us help build what we once helped destroy. Let us protect what we once threatened. We have been students of war for 10,000 years. Perhaps now we can learn peace. Perhaps we can learn it together. She stepped back from the podium. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly the Villani representative began to applaud. The Tyranny joined in. More and more species added their voices until the entire assembly was filled with sound. It was not total acceptance. Trust would take time to build. Old fears would not disappear overnight. But it was a beginning. On Earth, Admiral Park Do-yun watched the broadcast from his small apartment overlooking the sea. He had a glass in his hand and tears in his eyes. He thought about all the soldiers who had died, all the ships that had been lost, all the sacrifices that had been made to reach this moment. His door chimed. He opened it to find Captain Minji, no, Admiral Minji now, standing in the hallway with a bottle of wine. May I come in? She asked. Always. They sat together, watching the sunset paint the ocean gold and red. Neither spoke for a long time. They did not need to. They had served together for too many years to require words. Finally, Minji raised her glass. To the fleet that saved the galaxy. Do-yun shook his head. No, to the species that finally grew up. They drank in silence. Across the galaxy, a new era was beginning. The Krath Dominion was gone, replaced by a careful process of reconstruction and reconciliation. Species that had never dared to dream of freedom now built their own futures. And humanity, the legendary warriors who had answered a desperate call for help, stood ready to face whatever came next. They were still dangerous. They would always be dangerous. 10,000 years of war had made sure of that. But they had also learned what that danger was for. Not conquest, not domination, not revenge. Protection, defense, hope. The stars had called for help. Humanity had answered. And in answering, they had found something they had been searching for their entire history. A purpose beyond survival. A reason to exist beyond mere strength. They had found their place in the universe, and nothing would ever be the same.